All right. All right, guys. So, chapter 12 is all about personality disorders. Hey, it worked. So, how would you guys define personality? What is a personality?
Every situation.
Oh, how would you define it? Not how the book defines it. How would you define it?
What you act like.
What you act like, okay? What else? What do you guys think of with person? What is a personality? So it's whatever makes you an individual, right? So personality, it involves the way in which a person perceives the world, their attitudes, thoughts, and feelings. Personality is unique to each individual. What I want you to think about with personality, and when we're going through personality disorders, what is a big difference? And you're going to want to absolutely know this, okay? The one big difference with a personality disorder is flexibility is what makes the difference between a healthy personality and a disordered personality. That's the biggest distinction between the two. People that have personality disorders are unable to cope with stresses, with different situations. Some DSM criteria. This involves 4 core areas, or 4 areas in which they have issues. They have differences in thinking, feeling, interpersonal relationships, and impulse control. And these are going to be pretty much in all of the disorders. There's going to be a distinction in each one of these areas, or a disability or a inaccuracy in one, or at least one of these areas, most of the time in all 4. Okay? All right, so let's talk about the clusters. This one, you guys are going to take a lot of good notes. These are coming from, I don't have an individual slide for each disorder because there's just a lot that we're going to go over. So make sure you're taking good notes as I go over them, okay? You have cluster A, which is described as the odd or eccentric cluster. It's the odd or eccentric cluster. This includes paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder. Well, I'm going to go over each one of those and what they look like, okay? Cluster B, these are known as the dramatic, emotional, and erratic group. This is the antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. And then cluster 3 is known as the anxious and fearful cluster. This is avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is not the same as OCD, and I'm going to tell you what the difference is here in just a second. Okay?
Can someone have?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Most definitely. All right. So let's start with cluster A. Again, this is the odd or eccentric cluster. I've said that 3 times, so it's probably important, right? Yeah? Okay. All right. So first one is the paranoid personality disorder. This is a distrust or a suspicion of others. This is an extreme distrust and suspicion of other people. They have a real need to be self-sufficient. They don't want to rely on other people. They tend to keep distance from other people to protect themselves. Oftentimes, if someone tries to offer help, they can see that as criticism. They're out to hurt them in some way. They often are going to feel not just like someone's against them, but that they feel threatened by other people. Literally like someone is plotting against them. And I have a really good video for you guys at the end that goes over each one of these personality disorders, okay? It's a good summary of everything we're going over. We good with paranoid personality? Got it? Cool. All right, schizoid personality disorder. These people are thought to be extremely socially secluded and socially awkward. A big distinction here is they actually choose to be socially isolated. They're extremely introverted and have very little desire to have friends. They actually enjoy being solitary, like doing things on their own, being away from people. They often don't seek clinical help because they don't feel it's an issue. They're just like, I want to be alone. But the other people that are in their lives are clearly going to see this as an issue, you know? We good on schizoid? All right, cool. Schizotypal personality disorder. This is the one I want you to think about is they have odd beliefs or even magical kind of thinking. Often they have weird or odd speech patterns. They dress different than what, socially in the norm. They also can have some paranoid ideas and thinking. Sometimes you'll see these people too as being like nerdy or awkward people, and they really don't have any close friends at all. Okay. Are we all? That's everything for cluster A. Do you guys have any questions on cluster A? Okay. Go to cluster B. Again, this is the dramatic, emotional, and erratic group. They often have problems with impulse control and difficulty with emotion regulation or response to emotional situations. All right, we're going to go down the list here. You have antisocial personality disorder. This one can get confused because of the wording people often think of the social isolation aspect. But this is where they have an inflated or arrogant self-image. They often have a disregard for other people. They don't really care about the well-being of other people. This often can make them hostile and aggressive because they literally don't care. Okay, cool. The next one is borderline personality disorder. These people have an intolerance of being alone. They don't like to be alone. They have an unstable sense of themselves. They often engage in self-harm, even with suicidal attempts. They will do pretty much whatever that they can to avoid a feeling or belief or even actual abandonment. They don't want to be alone. They have a very black and white way of thinking. There's no gray area here. It's like, this is how it is. That's it. Some develop like psychotic issues later just because of all the stress that they get if they do have this feeling of abandonment. And often they have histories of physical and sexual abuse, neglect.
When you say psychotic, do you mean
Like having,
like a period of psychosis?
right. Like having a psychotic episode, yeah. Okay. I have a video specifically for borderline personality disorder. I'll make it a little bit clearer, okay? And then you have histrionic personality disorder. These people have an excessive need for attention. So it's not the aspect, comparing it to borderline of intolerance being alone. They have just this overwhelming need for attention. If they're not the center of attention, they often feel like they're not being appreciated enough. And then on top of that, they need an overwhelming sense of inclusion or acceptance. This makes them very susceptible to being influenced by other people. And it can make people can take advantage of them much more easily. In more severe cases, like they will even go so far to try to gain someone's attention, that they'll even start or say they're going to have a suicidal attempt. It's that kind of thing. Any questions on histrionic? We'll keep going then. All right, so the last one in this cluster is narcissistic personality disorder. These are people who have a need not for attention, but for admiration. They really want people to just admire them and who they are. They have a lack of empathy for other people. They have this overwhelming sense of self-worth and entitlement. This makes them very arrogant in behavior. They're often going to, fantasize about money and power, fame and success, all this stuff.
A lot of celebrities.
I would think so. I think you got to be careful though, because I think you could make some of this criteria fit a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I got that question last semester, and just thinking about it, you could make that fit most celebrities, or anyone in power at that aspect, anyone that has that sense. But you got to be careful with throwing out diagnoses. But I do think that probably celebrities, you would think so for sure.
I mean, obviously not all of them.
Right.
Many of them have empathy.
Right.
But there's a lot that don't.
Right. There's a lot that don't. That's like holier than thou kind of people. Yeah. These people will often exploit other people in order to get whatever status or power, whatever they're going for. But you're actually going to see they have a fragile self-esteem. If someone insults them, they often can't take it. This makes it difficult with forming relationships and stuff too, because who wants to be friends with someone who's narcissistic, who's constantly taking advantage of them and putting them down, and it's like, oh, look at me, I'm great. All right, any questions on cluster B? Cool. All right, let's watch a video.
Hey, I'm Whitney Easton. I am the author of the More Than Borderline blog with Healthy Place. And today I thought I would talk just a little bit about what it feels like to have BPD. Maybe you have it and you know what it feels like, but it's hard to put words to it. Or maybe you're someone that's just trying to understand and have a little bit of compassion. So in my experience, I described my darker days as the black hole. There was just this feeling deep inside of me. Sometimes it was abandonment, sometimes it was sadness, sometimes it was very intense rage. And it just felt like this swirling, chaotic mess inside of me that would just pull me in and I could not get out of it. I didn't even know where I started or stopped. And it was just this consuming ball of emotions inside of me that I really thought sometimes that they were going to kill me. They didn't, but it really felt like that. And I thought that they wouldn't end because they were just so intense. And, you know, that sort of emotional dysregulation is a hallmark symptom of BPD. The anxiety of BPD, to me, felt like I was going to jump and crawl out of my skin at any particular moment. Especially if there was conflict with people that I was close to in my life. It really felt like I just was going to rip my own skin off or crawl out of myself, which, if you've ever felt that way, it's extremely uncomfortable. It makes it really hard to focus. It makes it hard to sit still. Those who know me well know for a period of time, it was very challenging for me to even, sit through a 27-minute TV show because I just couldn't sit still. I'm a very high energy person, but sometimes it was just anxiety that made it very challenging to be still. There was no such thing for me. And, there was a lot of really impulsive behavior because there was this feeling that I had to get rid of whatever it was that was inside of me, that it was bad, that it was toxic, and I just had to get it out. And so, with impulsive behavior came a lot of shame and a lot of feeling really bad about some of my choices and just kind of drowning in sadness and depression and sorrow about some of the choices that I made and some of the people that I hurt. These are all sort of some of the negative aspects of BPD and the kind of classic symptoms, but tune back in next month and I would like to talk about some of the more positive things that someone with borderline personality disorder might experience.
Okay. All right. So I think it gives a kind of a face with it that some of these we talk about them and they feel like we're kind of a scary disorder to talk about or uncomfortable, but putting a face with somebody who's going through it or has gone through it or is dealing with it, I think it makes it a little bit more real. All right. So cluster C, again, this is the anxious and fearful cluster. High anxiety levels, very, very high anxiety levels. Avoidance of interpersonal interactions and circumstances. These people are going to probably avoid social interactions with people because of feelings of anxiety. The first one we're going to talk about is avoidant personality disorder. This is someone who has a bunch of feelings of being inadequate or extremely or hypersensitive to criticism. These people actually do want friends, but will avoid activities because they have such a large feeling of insecurity. These insecurities will lead to people will say or do something and they think it's automatically like about them. You know what I mean? Like if someone says something in a general sense, they automatically think it's related to them. Okay? These people are going to be very painfully shy. This, of course, brings in low self-esteem. Any kind of an embarrassment or a rejection from others is just over the top of a reaction. Okay. The next one is dependent personality disorder. This is the excessive need to be taken care of. They have a fear and an irrational fear of separation. They will often let other people take initiative because they just don't really want to be, they don't want to go outside of their norm. They often will just agree to whatever the caretaker says or their spouse or whoever they're with. This makes them too very vulnerable to abuse, and they'll tolerate abuse because they're so fearful of that separation. These are the people too, like if one relationship ends, no matter how long they've been in it, they quickly will pursue another one like immediately because they can't even fathom being alone or by themselves. Very dependent on people. Okay. The next one is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, OCPD, not OCD. These people are very preoccupied with orderliness, perfectionism. They love rules and adhere to them. They like procedures and lists. They're very self-critical. They often have difficulty with making decisions. And that makes them not super great at task completion. They're often going to be seen as rigid and controlling, even stubborn. It sounds a lot like OCD there, right? But what makes this different is OCD, or someone that has OCD, has insight. They understand that there's an issue here. They get it. OCPD, they just think that it's normal behavior, and that it's even beneficial behavior. That's the difference between OCD and OCPD, is that OCD has insight. They understand there's an issue. OCPD does not. They think the behavior is normal. Cool? Any questions on cluster C? Awesome. That's all the disorders. Cool. So etiology, what is the cause of it? There's some genetic things. There's some studies that say that twins that have both personality, like they see that twins will both sets or both siblings will have a personality disorder. So they think there's probably a genetic link there. But there's not a specific, like this is the genetic link for antisocial personality disorder. There's, again, no one cause. There are some areas as far as biological factors I want you guys to note that are different with certain personalities. So I'm going to name these off while you guys write them down. I'll go slow so you can get it, okay? In paranoid personality disorder, the amygdala is abnormal. Okay? In schizotypal personality disorder, the temporal lobe is abnormal. Okay? In borderline and antisocial personality disorder, the prefrontal cortex is abnormal. Okay? And then in narcissistic and obsessive compulsive personality disorders, the frontolimbic regions are abnormal. FRONTO Limbic. Frontolimbic regions are abnormal. All right, so some environmental factors. Well, let me back to the genetic thing real quick. So this brings up that conversation of nature versus nurture. Is a person born with a personality disorder? Is it something that they've learned through parenting skills, through situations that they've been put through as children? You know, it's an interesting idea, the nature versus nurture aspect of it. And people, there's not a this is what causes it for any of them. Some environmental factors, this is important to know too. Very important to know, hint, that a baby's temperament and the parent's personality and how they fit together, okay? So the parent and baby's fit tends to be very crucial in developing different personality traits. So the baby and the parents fit, the baby's temperament, the parent's personality, how well they fit together seems to be pretty important. Caregiver response to how the baby, their temperament is another large player in this, and how it influences how the baby will respond. You guys ever seen sometimes like if a baby or a toddler or whatever falls and you're like, oh, come here, and then they start crying, but if you're like, oh, come on, you're good, you get up, and how they react different to that, they kind of play off what the parent, how the parent reacts to it. Should they cry? They don't know, like, oh my gosh, what should I do, you know? Some traumatic childhood experiences like physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, neglect, death of a parent, separation, or divorce. These tend to be like comorbid factors with developing personality disorders. It's down in one of the clusters. No, it's not in one of these. Reactive attachment disorder. I think you guys talk about that in peds. Yeah. All right, so the prevalence. It's estimated that 6 to 10% of the general population has personality disorder. These are put up here in prevalence. It's obsessive compulsive. I meant to put personality. I'm sorry. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder is about 7.9%. You don't need to know these percentages. This is just for your information. Narcissistic disorder is about 6.2, and borderline personality disorder is about 5.9 of all personality disorders. Okay. So what is the course here? Usually people will recognize signs and symptoms during adolescence and early adult life. But again, what did I tell you was the biggest defining factor between having a personality disorder and not having a personality disorder? Flexibility. Flexibility is the key to how the course will work. Okay. Not having flexibility is what correlates with having a personality disorder. You're going to really, really, really want to know that. Let's see. Some gender differences. So certain disorders are more common in males and others are more common in females. Females are more common for borderline, histrionic, and dependent disorders, and males are more common in antisocial personality disorder. One thing you need to consider here are gender or social stereotypes too, and how that might relate in overdiagnosis or underdiagnosis to some disorders. Like, think of social norms of, females and males of what someone might think of in gaining into diagnosis. So the whole idea of the dependent disorder. Why might that be more common in females diagnosed than a male? Thinking of social stereotypes. Women might be more needy. Okay, that's a social stereotype. Why might men not be diagnosed with this dependent disorder is common as females. They're not supposed to be dependent, okay? So the fact of the I'm taking care of myself kind of aspect, that kind of a stereotype, it might make it underdiagnosed in men and overdiagnosed in women. Just something to think about. And then there's differences too in different ethnic groups, cultural groups, and social backgrounds as well. All those different types of stereotypes as well. There's some cultures where, the female is completely dependent on the male because they have to be, in different countries. So that doesn't necessarily mean there's a personality disorder. That's just their culture, right? Okay. All right. So some impact on occupational performance. Let's talk a little bit about this. In what ways have we talked about cognition-wise? Okay. So they're thinking, what would be an area of occupation that would be affected with any of these personality disorders? Job, education, social. That's a bunch of them, right? A lot of different things. Remember, they have very rigid and distorted kind of thinking patterns. So that is going to throw a wrench in just about every area of occupation, right? If they don't have the flexibility that we've talked about, they have problems with making decisions. Affectivity. This is like their emotional response. They have issues with responding correctly emotionally. Where are some areas of occupation that might be affected that way? What are some areas? So affectivity, the emotion response. Okay, so we've covered how each one, they don't really emotionally respond either on a positive or negative aspect or just overreacting. Why is that such a negative impact on occupation? Anything that is social. Okay, so give me an example.
I mean, kind of already what was said, like in work, if you're acting appropriately or responding appropriately.
Yeah.
Maybe you could fit it anywhere, really.
Just dealing with the general public. I think that gets on all of our nerves. Now throw in a personality disorder, how much more they would overreact to something. Very good. Impulse control problems. Well, how might that be a problem in occupation? What's an area that they're going to struggle with? Well, name one. Name. Give me one. Okay. Okay. How does impulse control affect education?
But like, this causing a meltdown.
Okay. Okay. What about like money management? Would that be a big issue with impulse control, not being able to control what they buy, spending too much money on something?
They won't spend any money.
Right. Think about like the narcissistic personality, like they will spend all their money to get, the fame or impress somebody. They'll go out and spend $4,000 on a suit for a job interview or something, that kind of aspect, just because they want that feeling of entitlement, right? And then significant interpersonal problems. I think that one kind of speaks for itself, like making relationships with people, both like, partnerships and friendships. It's going to throw a wrench in pretty much all of that. Let's talk about treatment for a second. This tends to be very difficult to treat and actually do and have an effective change on this person. Psychotherapy, behavior therapy are some common ones. Medications are there, but often when someone is treated with something with medications, they're still going to have some of the symptoms. So there's not a medication that's going, I'm going to give you this and it's going to fix the whole disorder. It's not how it works. If you go to page 180 in your books, there's a table there. It's table 12.2. It gives you some common interventions for people with personality disorders, things like what OT might do. Some of them look similar to other ones that we've seen that are treatment approaches. One I want you guys to pay special attention to. I mean, you should probably pay special attention to it on table 12 too, is mindful meditation. Mindful meditation, the target or the goal of that intervention is to enhance emotional well-being, and kind of how they would do it is a brief or a form of meditation, that focuses awareness on non-judgmentally on the present. If you guys want to read more about that, there's a whole chapter on emotion and mindfulness meditation in your book. We don't go over it though. But that whole table is filled with a lot of good common treatment interventions and approaches for personality disorders. So check it out. It'll help you with studying for sure. So what is the role of occupational therapy? What are we going to do? We're going to focus on those 4 core impairments that we just talked about: the cognition, affect, impulse control, and interpersonal relationships. And we're going to come up and use some of these common treatment approaches to help people, right? And help them overcome these 4 different areas of impairment. So you guys have any questions for me? No, we're good? All right. Does Beckley have any questions?
No.